Bell subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. He slipped into my room at midnight. What my son did while I slept still haunts me. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Claire Morrison lay restless in her bed, staring at the ceiling of her childhood home. She had returned 3 months ago after her divorce, seeking solace in the familiar walls that had once sheltered her dreams. But tonight felt different, charged with an electricity she couldn't name. What she didn't know was that downstairs her 22-year old son Daniel was making a decision that would change everything between them forever. Claire pulled the covers closer, her mind wandering to the conversation she'd overheard earlier that evening. Daniel had been on the phone with someone, his voice hushed but urgent. "I can't keep pretending anymore," he had whispered. "She needs to know the truth about what happened that night." The floorboards creaked softly in the hallway outside her room. Claire's breath caught. Someone was moving through the house with deliberate stealth, and her heart began to race with a mixture of fear and anticipation she couldn't understand. 3 months earlier, Claire had arrived at her mother's old Victorian house with nothing but 2 suitcases and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Her marriage to Richard had crumbled after 15 years, leaving her feeling like a stranger in her own life. At 42, she felt invisible, forgotten, like a ghost haunting the ruins of her former happiness. Daniel had been her anchor through it all. Her son had grown into a remarkable man, tall, with gentle eyes that reminded her of her father, and a quiet strength that made her feel protected. He had postponed his graduate studies to help her through the separation, moving back to the family home to keep her company. "You don't have to babysit me," Claire had protested weakly when he first suggested it. "I'm not babysitting anyone, Mom." Daniel had replied, his voice carrying a tenderness that made her chest tight. "I just think we could both use the company." But there had been something in his eyes, a depth, a longing that she had attributed to his concern for her well-being. She had been too lost in her own pain to recognize it for what it truly was. The weight of unspoken words. As the weeks passed, Claire began to notice the way Daniel looked at her. It wasn't the casual glance of a son checking on his mother's well-being. These were lingering looks, filled with something that made her stomach flutter in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She caught him watching her as she tended to the garden in the early morning light, her hair catching the golden rays of dawn. She felt his eyes follow her as she moved through the kitchen, preparing dinner with the same care she had shown when he was a child. There was reverence in his gaze, as if she were something precious he was afraid might disappear. Claire told herself it was her imagination, a product of her fractured emotional state. But deep down, she felt it too, this magnetic pull between them that had nothing to do with the bond between mother and son, and everything to do with the recognition of 2 souls who understood each other completely. The realization both devastated and intoxicated her. The garden incident had happened on a warm Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Claire was kneeling in the rose garden, her hands deep in the rich earth, when she felt a shadow fall across her. She looked up to find Daniel standing there, his expression unreadable. "You have dirt on your cheek," he said softly, his voice carrying a huskiness that made her pulse quicken. Before she could protest, he knelt beside her and reached out with his thumb, gently brushing away the smudge. The touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool breeze rustling through the leaves. Their eyes met and held. In that moment, Claire saw everything. The longing, the confusion, the desperate love that transcended every boundary society had constructed. Daniel's hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," he replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "I know we shouldn't, but I can't stop feeling this way about you. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she searched his face, seeing her own conflicted feelings reflected in his eyes. "This is impossible," she breathed. "I know," he said again, his hand finally dropping away, "but it doesn't make it less real." They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, kneeling in the garden among the roses, both afraid to move, afraid to break the spell that had settled over them. The slow burn after that day, the air between them crackled with unspoken desire. Every innocent touch, his hand on her shoulder as he passed behind her chair, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his morning coffee, felt charged with electricity. Claire found herself dressing more carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel beautiful. She caught herself lingering in doorways where she knew he would see her, hoping for those stolen glances that made her feel alive again. Daniel became more attentive, more protective. He would appear at her side when she needed help reaching something from a high shelf, his body pressing close to hers as he stretched above her. He would insist on walking her to her car when she went out in the evenings, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture that felt both innocent and intimate. They began having long conversations late into the night, sitting on the porch swing as the summer air wrapped around them like silk. They talked about everything and nothing, books, dreams, the way the moonlight made the garden look magical. But underneath every word was the current of something deeper, something that made Claire's skin tingle with anticipation. "Do you ever wonder," Daniel asked one night, his voice soft in the darkness, "what it would be like if we weren't? If we weren't what?" Claire prompted, though she knew exactly what he meant. "If we had met some other way, under different circumstances." Claire's breath caught. "Daniel, I think about it sometimes," he continued, his eyes fixed on the stars above them. "I think about how different everything would be, how simple it could be." The words hung between them like a confession, beautiful and heartbreaking in their honesty. The breaking point, the tension reached its peak on a stormy night in August. Claire had been unable to sleep, her mind churning with thoughts she couldn't quiet. She had wandered downstairs to make tea, hoping the familiar ritual would calm her restless spirit. Daniel was already in the kitchen, standing by the window and watching the rain streak down the glass. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice soft. She shook her head, suddenly very aware of her silk nightgown, the way it clung to her curves. "Too much on my mind. Want to talk about it." Claire hesitated, then shook her head again. "I don't think talking would help." They stood there in the dim kitchen, the storm raging outside, both knowing they were standing on the edge of something that would change everything. The air between them felt thick, heavy with possibility and danger. "Claire," Daniel said, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. She looked up at him, seeing her own desire reflected in his eyes. "We can't," she whispered. "I know." He replied, but he was moving closer, drawn by a force neither of them could resist. When he reached out to cup her face in his hands, she didn't pull away. When he leaned down, his lips hovering just inches from hers, she felt herself rising to meet him. But at the last moment, she pulled back, her hand pressed against his chest. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We can't do this, Daniel. We can't." The pain in his eyes nearly broke her resolve, but she stepped away, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." She fled then, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen with the storm raging around them both. The distance after that night, Claire began pulling away. She took a part-time job at the local library, anything to get out of the house and away from the magnetic pull of Daniel's presence. She started making excuses to avoid their evening conversations, claiming fatigue or headaches. Daniel, for his part, seemed to understand. He gave her space, but she could feel his eyes on her, full of longing and patient love. He continued to care for her in small ways, leaving her favorite flowers on her nightstand, and making sure her car was serviced, bringing her tea when she worked late in the study. But the distance was killing them both. Claire could see the sadness growing in Daniel's eyes, the way he moved through the house like a man carrying an unbearable weight. She felt it, too, the constant ache of wanting something she couldn't have, loving someone in a way that society would never understand or accept. The revelation it was on a crisp October evening that Claire discovered the truth about Daniel's feelings and her own. She had been cleaning out the attic when she found an old box of his things from college. Among the textbooks and notebooks was a leather journal, and though she knew she shouldn't, she found herself opening it. The pages were filled with her son's careful handwriting, but it wasn't homework or class notes. It was poetry, beautiful, heartbreaking poetry about love and longing, and the pain of wanting someone you can never have. She moves through my days like sunlight through water, beautiful and untouchable, the center of my world and the source of my torment. How do I love her when loving her is impossible? How do I stop when stopping would mean the death of everything true in my heart? Claire sank to her knees on the dusty attic floor, the journal clutched to her chest. The raw emotion in Daniel's words took her breath away. This wasn't some passing infatuation or confused attraction. This was deep soul, deep love, the kind that poets wrote about and lovers died for, and she felt it too. God help her, she felt it too. The night everything changed which brought her to this moment, lying in her bed at midnight, listening to footsteps in the hallway. Claire's heart raced as she heard the soft sound of her doorknob turning. The door opened slowly, and Daniel's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. "Mom," he whispered, "are you awake?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely audible. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. In the moonlight streaming through her window, she could see he was fully dressed, as if he had been pacing the house for hours. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I can't pretend that what I feel for you is anything other than what it is." Claire sat up in bed, pulling the covers around her. "Daniel, please, no, let me finish," he said, moving closer but stopping just out of reach. "I know this is impossible. I know society would never understand. I know that loving you the way I do makes me someone people would judge and condemn." His voice broke slightly as he continued. "But I also know that what I feel for you is the truest thing in my life. You're not just my mother. You're the woman I admire most in this world. You're beautiful and strong and kind, and being near you makes me want to be a better man." Tears streamed down Claire's face as she listened to his confession. "I've tried to stop feeling this way," Daniel continued. "I've tried to see you only as my mother, to love you only in the way a son should love his mother, but I can't. What I feel for you is bigger than that, deeper than that." He took another step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way," he whispered. "I'm not asking you to do anything that would hurt you or make you ashamed. I just needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand why I look at you the way I do, why being near you is both the greatest joy and the greatest torture of my life." Claire's heart shattered and soared at the same time. The raw honesty in his voice, the love shining in his eyes. It was everything she had felt but been too afraid to acknowledge. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, reaching out to him. He came to her then, kneeling beside the bed as she cupped his face in her hands. They stayed like that, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, sharing a love that was both impossible and inevitable. "What do we do now?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Daniel replied honestly. "I just know that I love you, not just as your son, but as a man loves a woman, completely, desperately, forever." The words hung between them in the moonlit room, beautiful and terrible in their truth. The choice Claire closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before them. She thought of her ex-husband, who had never looked at her with half the reverence she saw in Daniel's eyes. She thought of the lonely years stretching ahead, living in the shadows of a love she was too afraid to claim. And she thought of Daniel, this beautiful, gentle man who had given her his heart without reservation, who saw her not as a broken, middle-aged woman, but as someone worthy of the deepest kind of love. When she opened her eyes, she saw her future reflected in his gaze. "I love you too," she whispered, the words falling from her lips like a prayer and a confession. "I've been fighting it, but I love you too, not the way I should, but the way I do." The relief and joy that flooded Daniel's face was like watching the sun rise after the longest night. "We can't tell anyone," Claire continued, her practical mind already working through the implications. "No one would understand. They would think we were sick, wrong. I know," Daniel nodded. "This has to be our secret, our private truth. Are you sure you want this?" Claire asked, searching his face. "Are you sure you want to love someone you can never publicly claim? Someone you can never marry, never have a normal life with?" Daniel's answer was immediate and certain. "I would rather have one day of real love with you than a lifetime of pretending to feel something less with someone else." The poetry of his words broke her heart and mended it at the same time. The new beginning, what followed, was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Their love was conducted in stolen moments and secret glances, in conversations that meant everything and nothing to outside observers. They became masters of restraint in public, careful never to touch too long or look too intently. But in private, they created a world where their love could exist freely. They would sit together in the garden at twilight, Claire's head on Daniel's shoulder as they watched the stars emerge. They would dance slowly in the kitchen while dinner cooked, moving to music only they could hear. Their physical relationship developed slowly, carefully, with a tenderness that spoke to the sacred nature of what they shared. Every touch was precious, every kiss a communion of souls who had found their perfect match in the most impossible circumstances. They never spoke of their love as wrong or shameful. Instead, they chose to see it as rare and beautiful, a connection that transcended conventional boundaries and touched something eternal and true. The haunting truth months passed, and their secret love deepened, but with it came the constant awareness of living a double life. Claire found herself jumping at every phone call, fearing discovery. Daniel struggled with the weight of keeping such a profound truth hidden from the world. The haunting wasn't in guilt or shame. It was in the exquisite pain of perfect love that could never be fully expressed or acknowledged. It was in the knowledge that they had found something most people spent their entire lives searching for, but could never celebrate it openly. Late at night, as they lay together in the quiet sanctuary of Claire's room, they would sometimes talk about parallel universes, places where they might have met as strangers, where their love would be celebrated instead of hidden. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked one night, her head pillowed on Daniel's chest. "Never," he replied without hesitation. "I regret that we have to hide it. I regret that the world isn't ready for love like ours, but I will never regret loving you." His words were a balm to her soul, a reminder that what they shared was pure and true, regardless of what others might think. The eternal love. As winter settled over their small town, Claire and Daniel continued to navigate their hidden world of love. They found joy in the smallest moments, sharing a secret smile across the dinner table, brushing fingers as they passed dishes, the way Daniel would kiss her forehead when he thought no one was looking. Their love had become a living thing, growing stronger with each passing day. It sustained them through the loneliness of keeping such a profound secret, through the pain of watching other couples express their love freely while theirs remained forever hidden. But perhaps that was what made it so precious, the fact that it existed despite every obstacle, that it flourished in the shadows where other loves might wither and die. Claire often thought about that midnight confession, the moment when Daniel had slipped into her room and changed everything forever. It haunted her not because she regretted it, but because it had been the beginning of the most beautiful and impossible love story she could have imagined. In quiet moments, she would catch Daniel looking at her with that same expression of wonder and devotion, and she knew that whatever challenges they faced, whatever secrets they had to keep, they had found something worth every sacrifice. Their love was their private truth, their hidden treasure, their ghost that would haunt them forever, not with sorrow, but with the profound joy of two souls who had recognized each other across every boundary and chosen love above all else, and in the end, that was enough it had to be. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that can never be told, except in whispered confessions at midnight when the world is asleep and two hearts can finally speak their truth to the darkness, knowing that somewhere in the space between right and wrong, impossible and inevitable, love finds a way to exist in all its complicated, beautiful glory. The grandfather clock chimed 1 in the morning as Claire and Daniel held each other in the moonlit room, their love a secret that would haunt them forever, not with regret, but with the bittersweet knowledge that they had found something most people only dream of, in the most impossible place of all.